At the beginning of the movie, we see an eccentric woman named Martha sitting in her apartment. She seemed to be enjoying some alone time, but then her boyfriend burst into her room and started making out with another woman. When Martha confronts him, there is no trace of remorse on his face. Instead, he asks her to have a threesome. Martha clearly refused, and she broke up with him on the spot. She meets Mr. Wright. He is a former CIA agent. He approaches a woman and explains that he is a hired hitman to kill her husband. He then puts on his signature red clown nose, tells her that murder is wrong, and shoots her. While Francis is at work at the hotel, an assassination team prepares to trap him outside. The team is led by assassin Hopper. However, knowing that Francis would overwhelm the unprofessional assassins, he decided to remain in the surveillance van. As expected, Francis uses his outstanding fighting skills to take down the assassins one after another. He doesn't even sweat. After the incident, Hopper receives a phone call from his boss, who instructs him to pose as an FBI agent and work with Gus Patrick, a local police detective assigned to arrest Francis. The next morning, Sophie takes Martha to her workplace, a pet store. So the protagonist adopts a cat, even though she has been warned that she is a wild animal. But Martha doesn't listen, and her cat ends up scratching Sophie. Later, Martha stops at a supermarket on her way home. Coincidentally, Francis was also there to buy supplies. Suddenly, Martha clumsily bumps into a shelf, scattering her pile of birth control pills. But surprisingly, Francis quickly catches her with her extraordinary skills. Martha witnesses this and is in awe of her, and she falls in love at first sight. They talk for a while, and Francis also likes her quirkiness. He then asks her out on a date, and the two end up spending some romantic time together. When Francis speaks honestly about her job in the next scene, Martha interprets it as irony. She believes that such a job exists only in the cinema. Sometime later, while they are walking in the park, Francis suddenly realizes that the killer is nearby. When we see a man aiming a sniper at Francis, we see that his instincts are correct. Fortunately, our hero quickly danced with Martha and dodged all the bullets one by one. She doesn't even realize they are under attack. After the encounter, the couple finally spend the night together at Martha's house. The next morning, Francis leaves her a message and asks her to continue their date that night. Martha is impressed and happily makes breakfast. However, Sophie is a little skeptical about this mysterious friend. That night, Francis and Martha meet at a bar, where he meets Espinosa, one of the hitmen who came out of the hotel earlier. He then apologized and chased Espinosa outside. Immediately after leaving the bar, Francis tells the hitman that he is not going to kill anyone today. But Espinosa is merciless, so she prepares a dagger and tries to attack Francis. As usual, Francis uses his quick reflexes to avoid any attacks. Then, when the time is right, he stabs the killer in the throat with the same dagger and kills him. Meanwhile, two half-brothers from a crime family, Vaughn and Richie Cardigan, want to hire Francis to kill their special target. My younger brother Vaughn is ambitious but lacks intelligence and talent. The two brothers are constantly at odds, and Vaughn is anxious to remove Richie from the issue. Vaughn convinces a local gangster to help him recruit Francis. He wants to take control of the local gangster empire in his brother's place. Basically, his strategy is to hire a hitman to replace Richie. The murderer is preferably Francis, who has a history of murdering people who employ him. Later, upon returning home, Martha realizes that she doesn't even know Francis' full name, even though she dated him for several days. To this, the former mercenary replied that he despised his name, and therefore he would not reveal it to anyone. He only has one name, Francis. As they continued their conversation, Martha asked curiously how she was able to get all the birth control pills at the supermarket. Francis shows off his knife skills and tries to convince Martha to catch them. She is surprised at first, but when you grab her blade, You feel a trembling pleasure. One afternoon, Francis takes Martha to meet the killer for the first time, because he wants her to believe that he is her assassin. Later, while waiting in the car, he witnesses Francis meeting a man on a bridge. The latter wants him to kill some people, but soon, Francis puts on a clown's nose and casually kills the man. Witnessing this, Martha panics and she finally realizes that her new friend was not joking about killing people. She gets scared and asks him to drive her home. But before they know it, one of Vaughn's henchmen follows them to the apartment. After Francis dropped her off at the house, Martha sat there in disbelief. Sometime later, Hopper and Gus arrive at her house, posing as FBI agents, and interview her, explaining that Francis is the killer with her conscience. They also learned that Francis kills the people who hire him because he adheres to one of his moral codes, that murder is wrong unless some people deserve it. I'll let her know that there is. Hopper warns Martha that Francis is very dangerous. Meanwhile, Francis decides to visit her apartment. Hopper has tracked his location and is ready for him. However, Francis attacks him from behind out of nowhere and drags him indoors. He then informs the girls that Hopper is not an FBI agent. Naturally, Martha doesn't know who to trust since both men told her different stories. However, after thinking for a moment, she realizes that Francis has always been honest with her, so she takes Francis to her bedroom and the two begin making out. However, their romantic moment is interrupted when Hopper's men announce on the radio that they are coming to pick up Francis. This alerts the hero, and he tries to leave in a hurry. But just at that moment, several men from the Cardigan gang appear. One of the assassins, named Steve, surprises Francis with his superior fighting skills. He also appears to be a trained mercenary. Francis fights off a group of assassins while trying to get Martha safely out of the house. Francis and Martha then head outside, but a large number of assassins still pass through and surround them. Vaughn and his men also arrive on the scene and search for Francis. The couple is attacked again and takes shelter near the water tank. Francis must fire and kill one of the assassins in order to protect himself. He then plays a psychological trick on them and tells them that if he dies today, he will not be able to return to his wife and children. Fortunately, the trick worked as the assassins slowly retreated and left the scene. Francis and Martha also come out publicly, but are attacked by Vaughn. However, Vaughn quickly surrenders, realizing that he has no chance against a murderer like Francis. He also admires his outstanding fighting skills and his determination. However, to everyone's surprise, this turned out to be just a ploy to distract Francis. Clever Steve arrives on the scene and punches Francis from behind, knocking her unconscious. It turns out he was just lying about not going after Francis. After all, he works for Van and his men. Vaughn and Steve then kidnap Martha and give her a address where Francis can find her. As they flee, Francis fights Hopper, who arrives shortly after the gang leaves the scene. However, he soon escapes undetected. In the next scene, Martha is taken to the Cardigan brothers' home with Francis. To intimidate his girlfriend Martha, Vaughn taunts her and punches her several times, but Martha remains unfazed. Sometime later, Francis arrives at the house and eliminates all the assassins that stand in his way. When Van arrives, he quickly captures Martha and orders her to kill Richie, thereby revealing his betrayal to his younger brother. However, Francis saves her without difficulty and says he is done killing her. He then puts a gun between Van and Richie and says they should take matters into their own hands. When Francis leaves the room, his brothers take up arms. They wrestle for a while and Van manages to grab it. He then kills his half-brother without remorse. Meanwhile, Francis tries to escape with Martha, but he reunites with Hopper and they start arguing. Meanwhile, a hitman captures Martha and threatens to kill her. But to her surprise, thanks to the training Francis had given her earlier, she easily fought him off. After a while, a recovered Vern reappears seeking revenge, but he too falls victim to Martha's extraordinary fighting skills. Meanwhile, Hopper gains the upper hand in the fight and prepares to shoot Francis. But then Steve comes from behind and kills him. It seems that he has changed his position again. Francis is grateful and tells Hopper that Hopper is worth $5 million, dead or alive. When Steve hears this, the two mercenaries begin celebrating as they walk hand in hand.